Tonight's message is looking at a topic that guaranteed has affected all of us in one way or another. How many of you would agree that in some way or another we are impacted more by media and technology now than we were 20 years ago? Are we? Would that be correct? All right. You may not be addicted to it. You may not be immersed in it all the time. You may be. Either way, this is going to shed some light on how this is affecting us. This session is a condensed version of this DVD series that you may have noticed on the table outside called iChild. I released this earlier this year. This is a three-part, one-hour session DVD that looks at the impacts of media on children. I could cover it all tonight, but you probably don't want to sit here for 3 hours. So we're going to do a condensed version and just look at some main points of this. Now, the 3 sessions in this DVD are Disc 1, Uninformed, Research versus Media Hype. We hear a lot out there, oh yeah, this is good for your child to learn better. This will help you do this better. Is that research-based, or is that just hype from maybe those selling the media? Disc 2, Uneducated, understanding educational, sometimes uneducational media. And Disc 3, Unreality, Technology versus reality. Because children are often growing up in an unrealistic world when they are immersed in media. So we're going to just take the high points out of those and get an overview of this topic. And I want to clarify, this is not about what kind of content your children are seeing. This is about the media itself and how the screen is affecting them, etc. So with that, we know that, I get my clicker working here. There we go. Children spend more time with electronic media than they do in any other activity aside from sleep. Any other activity aside from sleep. More than eating, more than school, more than character development. While children might be getting slightly more sleep than media, young people are getting more time in electronic media than any other activity, period, including sleep. The current average for most young people is from 8 to 12 hours per day, with heavy users up to 17 or 18 hours per day in media use. Per day. That's out of a 24-hour period. 75% of children aged 0 to 8 have access to a smartphone, and nearly 40% of children are using tablets. Even babies. They did a study and found, if you look here on the last one on the right, 4 or more hours a day. That's nearly 15% of babies using smartphones for more than 4 hours a day. Sorry, media, not just smartphones, all types of media. I don't think it takes research, though, to realize that this is affecting us and that we are using more, children are using more media than they ever have in history. But maybe you're saying, well, this doesn't really apply to me, though, because I don't use that much media. I don't use 10 to 12 hours a day, and I certainly don't let my kids use that much. Well, that may be true. I hope that's true. I hope you aren't having your children use that much media. But as I mentioned, I'm sure we're using more now than we used to. How is this affecting us? That's the real question I had as I embarked on this research project. Whether you're using an hour a day or 10 hours a day, how is this affecting our children? What is it actually doing to them? So I'd like to really consider that. You know, as an aside, though, I find it interesting that never in history have we been so connected. And yet, our social lives are shallower than ever. Never have we had so much to grab our attention and our children's attention, while attention deficit disorders are on the rise. Kids have access to more information right at their fingertips than ever before, yet test scores and school performance have failed to keep up. Eagerly, we snap up the next and greatest gadgets, considering them a help and advancement in our lives, and we pass them on to our children, considering them the greatest advancement in babysitting technology of the millennium. We blindly assume that the tech companies have assessed the effects, and therefore these fancy toys won't hurt our children. After all, there's so much educational value, right? Think of how much they can learn. But is there a cost? Are there reasons for concern? What really are the effects of these inventions? Perhaps we should take a step back and consider whether or not there are any side effects of children's media use, and have the effects really been assessed before putting these gadgets on the market? In reality, we have been grossly uninformed. Rarely, if ever, are the effects considered by the market, and in fact, the research on electronics use is typically overlooked by the market. The research points to significant negative effects that are worth considering, but you don't hear about those. It's true that electronics and technology can be beneficial. I realize that. I'm sitting here using a PowerPoint, right? I'm using a laptop. I have a smartphone in my pocket. It's a bit of a irony, disconnect, if you want to put it that way, that we are using technology and media to present something about the dangers of said media. So I realize that it can be helpful and beneficial in our lives. I understand that. We all use it. Perhaps too much. I do like to write sermons with notebook and paper. We don't always have to use it, but it's time, I feel, that we stop the free-for-all and take a balanced approach and just say, how much of it is absolutely necessary. And when we consider the effects, we'll also realize that what's okay for adults might not be okay for children. There is definitely a difference there in the age of what is okay and what is not okay. Meet William. William is 4 years old. This picture isn't William, but we'll pretend that it is. Now, according to an article in the Daily Mail in January 2014, one morning at 4 a.m., William came into his dad's room, woke him up, and said, "I need the iPad, Daddy." Need the iPad. Dad marched William back to bed and told him what he really needed was to go back to sleep. At 7 a.m., though, when Dad got up, he noticed that the iPad, which had been in his room, was gone. He found William in the living room playing a game on the iPad, the battery level indicating he'd been playing for over 2 hours. Later that day, as they considered William's actions, symptoms they should be called, William's parents realized that William had become an iPad addict. iPad addict, you're laughing. What's that? Well, as crazy as it sounds, we have a new category of addictions that we are actually studying in the medical research. Addictions just as strong as a drug addiction, and it's affecting children as young as 4 years of age. William's not the only one. A recent article was titled, "Toddlers Becoming So Addicted to iPads They Require Therapy." Children as young as 4 are becoming so addicted to smartphones and iPads they require psychological treatment. This article mentions a 4-year-old girl from the UK who had to be treated for an addiction to the iPad. Dr. Richard Graham began the UK's first technology addiction program a few years ago, and he says there are many more addicts of this age. He tells us that young technology addicts experience the same withdrawal symptoms as alcoholics or heroin addicts when the devices were taken away. The same withdrawal symptoms as alcoholics or heroin addicts. And so to get their kids unaddicted, parents are paying Dr. Graham's clinic nearly $20,000 for a 28-day digital detox, it's called. Wow, I think there must be cheaper ways. But you say, hang on, my child is not addicted. This really doesn't apply here. Well, that may be true, and I hope that's true. But maybe we should consider what constitutes an addiction. As I studied what constitutes a tech addiction, I realized that our children and we ourselves are much closer to being addicted than we realize. What constitutes an addiction? First of all, withdrawal symptoms. Device addiction has physical withdrawal symptoms. They did a study in 2011, and researchers asked 1,000 college students around the world to go 24 hours without using their smartphones. I was amazed they found 1,000 students willing to do that. 1,000 students. Most of them reported symptoms such as anxiety and depression in the 24-hour period that they were away from their smartphones. That's withdrawal, the same as taking away from a drug. If your child is irritable, anxious, or sad after having a device or other media taken away, there is a good chance they may have an unhealthy attachment to that device. Tolerance. Now, just like a drug addict needs bigger and bigger doses or hits to get the same effect, device users can also develop a tolerance. They find that kids might enjoy a device for, say, 10 minutes. Pretty soon they need it for a half hour. Pretty soon they need it for an hour. And it keeps building, just like an addiction. A loss of interest in other activities. If a child maybe once loved playing soccer or picking on their siblings or climbing trees, but they seem to have lost interest in those activities in favor of spending time on their device, there's another indicator that might be getting close to the addiction. A lack of control. Addicts typically have an inability to control their usage. Now, I know that 4-year-olds are not famous for self-control, but there may be an indicator there still if parents have a really hard time taking that tablet or whatever it is away from the child without this meltdown. Deception. If we find children hiding their usage, there's another indicator. This may be nearing addiction. And again, these are symptoms of substance addictions just as much as they are tech addictions. Means of escaping reality. This is one I have seen a lot. A child doesn't want to face a stressful situation, and they retreat to a device of some sort. If that's their go-to activity when things get stressful, that can be a sign of addiction. And losing opportunities. When they lose out on relationships, failing school, performing poorly at work, things like that. Obviously that tends to be in the later ages. But that is another indicator that they may be getting close to an addiction. So I think these symptoms of tech addiction may be more common than we like to admit, aren't they? I even questioned my own device usage as I studied this out. We need to be really careful about this. Now, okay, I realize that we or our children might not be all out addicted, but to me this raises some very, very important questions. We know that technology is addicting. That goes, we've seen that in the research just now, and just Google it. We know that technology is very addicting. So that to me should make us stop and think. This may be a bit of an imperfect analogy, but say alcohol, smoking. Why don't we give that to children? Why is it legally not allowed that children partake of these substances until they are, whatever the age is it 21? I don't even know. Older. Well, we know that from the development of the frontal lobe that children don't have that ability to put a stop to their usage of these substances. I'm not saying they're good after 21, but there's a reason that we limit it for children. So if these devices are so addicting, then should we maybe think that maybe children who don't have that well-developed frontal lobe shouldn't be partaking of them so much because maybe they don't have those abilities to stop and not allow the addiction to develop? Just a thought there. Now, I do want to clarify what an addiction is. When we speak of an addiction, this is a chemical change in the brain. This is not where, I had somebody tell me recently, well, I know somebody that's addicted to eating broccoli. Okay, maybe they are. Maybe they really like broccoli. But we're talking about physiological brain changes here that are, this is stuff that can be studied by the research. And again, very similar to pulling away from drug addiction. So is technology addicting? Yes, absolutely. How much should we use? Well, I suppose that's where this analogy with drugs and alcohol should end, because I'm not sure that we could completely ditch it. But it should make us stop and think that if something is so addicting, it needs to have very strict boundaries. And again, for children, is it absolutely necessary? Probably not. So what are the current recommendations for media use, you may be asking? Well, that's hard to tell because it depends on who you ask. The research, it's a bit of a problem because the research is often slow in coming, much slower than the technology comes out. We have the new gadget and new electronic, but the research comes out 5 years later and says, oh, by the way, that's not good for your child. Too late. They've been using it for 5 years. So we sort of have to take a preventative approach when it comes to this. Now, back in the TV days, it was recommended no screen time for children under the age of 2. Dr. Dimitri Kostakis has done, he's at the Seattle Children's Hospital, has done extensive research on children's media use, and he's found limiting it or eliminating it until age 3. Again, I mentioned this morning that they're sort of succumbing to societal pressures saying, you just can't get away from it, so just try to limit it as much as you can. But the research is still pretty clear that it's definitely not good at all for under the age of 3. But Dr. Christakis is not the only voice. Many others have urged keeping kids screen-free until later ages, 7, 8, or even 12. An article was recently published titled 10 Reasons Why Handheld Devices Should Be Banned for Children Under the Age of 12. Banned, she says. She was actually arguing for making this a legal point, where it was illegal to give your child a device under the age of 12. Now, a lot of people said that she went too far. This article generated a lot of controversy. And so as I was researching this article and I saw a lot of opinions of other people saying, this lady went way too far, this can't be right, I said, well, okay, what were her points? Why did she make this bold claim? Is it research-based or not? Okay, well, here's what she said. First of all, the concept of rapid brain growth. Between 0 and 2 years, infant brains triple in size and continue in a state of rapid development to 21 years of age. Early brain development is determined by their environment. It's called environmental stimuli. Stimulation to a brain caused by overexposure to technologies like cell phones, internet, iPads, TV has been shown to be associated with executive functioning and attention deficit and cognitive delays, impaired learning, increased impulsivity, and decreased ability to self-regulate. Basically, what she's saying here is that children's brains are developing so rapidly that this is a critical time window where they need to get a proper environmental stimuli. And she says the electronics are not the proper type of environmental stimuli. And we know that from the book Child Guidance, right? Outdoors, nature. More than that, the areas of the brain that control spirituality, cause to affect reasoning, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language, memory, moral understanding, conscience, and character. Is this an important list? Do you want your child deficient in any of these things? No, definitely not. The areas of the brain, area, it's plural, that control these areas, these functions, develop in the first 7 years of a child's life. That's not to say there isn't more development in these areas at later ages, but the primary stage of development for these things is in the first 7 years of a child's life. So are we in danger of replacing these things, the culture of these things, by media? That certainly is a danger. She also mentioned delayed development. She has brought out that movement is essential. And as we sit a child in a sedentary environment with a piece of electronics, that they're not getting the movement that they need. And it's critical for learning. It's critical for proper development. So she's saying that these electronics may actually cause delayed development. Obesity, also due to a lack of movement, a lack of sufficient exercise, excessive tech use for children can lead to obesity and other health problems. Sleep deprivation. I find it interesting that about 75% of children have a television in their bedroom. What percentage? 75. Do you think it's any coincidence that about 75% of children are sleep deprived? To the extent that their grades are detrimentally impacted. That was according to Boston College in 2012. So far, these points that Dr. Rowan has brought out are pretty solid. Maybe she's right about that age 12 thing. Mental illness. Now, there are various factors for mental illness, but technology overuse is definitely implicated as a causal factor in rising rates of child depression, anxiety, attachment disorder, attention deficit disorder, autism, bipolar disorder, lost my place in my notes, problematic child behavior. Many areas of mental illness are linked to overuse of technology. And again, I know there are many other causes of that, but another good point that she's making here. Aggression. This is more related to violent TV viewing or violent gaming, but we should keep in mind, by beholding, we become changed, right? The things that they're viewing, the things that they're interacting with, if they are aggressive in nature, can cause this. Attention deficit disorders. There is still a lot of research to be done, but it's becoming pretty conclusive that tech use is definitely linked to attention deficit disorders. Studies clearly indicate an association between television viewing and reports of behavioral difficulties associated with ADHD. That was according to the Journal of Pediatric Psychology. Viewing television and playing video games each are associated with increased subsequent attention problems in childhood. We also heard from Dr. Healy this morning as we read that much of the early development of physical and mental skills and of their foundations in the brain comes from experimenting and solving problems with real-world materials. The long-term outcomes of forcing children's attention unnaturally may have even more serious implications than we have realized. Addictions. We've already seen this one pretty clearly. She's absolutely right that addictions are a concern. And radiation emission was another one mentioned. This may not be just applicable to age 12 and under, but the World Health Organization has classified cell phones and other wireless devices as a possible carcinogen due to radiation emission. That affects all of us, but it's certainly a reason for concern with children, as they believe that children may be more sensitive to that than adults are. So, did she have some good points there for keeping it away from children until age 12? I think so. Maybe she wasn't all that wrong, as her critics claimed. Health risks, though. This is another major consideration when it comes to media. A recent study was done by Common Sense Media. It was a meta-analysis, which is a review of many other studies. They looked at all the studies that they could find done in the past 30 years, 173 studies. This was a huge research project. And they found links to childhood obesity, tobacco use, drug use, alcohol use, lower academic achievement, earlier sexual behavior, attention deficit disorders, and hyperactivity. 75% of 127 studies reported the more time spent with media was associated with a negative health outcome. 86% of the studies with an increase in childhood obesity, 88% an increase in smoking, 80% an increase in alcohol use, 93% earlier sexual activity, 65% lower academic achievement, 69% to ADHD and other attention problems. Do we need more? That's a long list. That's a lot of significant research pointing to these problems, a link between media exposure and these problems. Another study found that time spent with a computer may take the place of time spent exercising or being active, and may put children at risk for obesity and eye, wrist, back, and health problems. Here's a list we saw this morning. I said we would unpack it more. This comes from Dr. Jane Healy's material. Now you may be wondering, like, okay, you just skipped over that whole health point. That's because I'm condensing a lot of material here. If you want to understand more about the health risk or the ADHD and the other things that I've mentioned, watch the iChild DVD. But let's look a little bit here at Dr. Jane Healy's material. She mentions that it overstimulates children and creates passive withdrawal, causes attention and listening problems, emphasizes skills which do not transfer well to reading or listening, requires less mental effort than reading, and shortens the time children are willing to spend on intellectual problems they are set to solve. That's a big list. Let's unpack some of this. Overstimulates children. What did we learn about overstimulation this morning? Very damaging, right? It is linked to many problems. Creates a passive withdrawal. Do we want children's brains to become passive? Withdrawn from active thinking? No, that's right up Satan's plans, not the Lord's plans. Causing attention and listening problems. Do we want our children to be able to pay attention? Yes or no? Yes. Do we want them to have listening problems? Most children have those enough as it is. We don't need to create more. It emphasizes skills which do not transfer well to reading or listening. Do we want them to be good readers? Yes, we do. We're not helping it with the media use. It requires less mental effort than reading it. And there is a reason right there why it's emphasizing skills which do not transfer well to reading or listening. It requires less mental effort. I mean, how many of you would agree it's easier to sit down and watch a neat video about something than sit down and study your Bible? Much easier, right? And so it's the age-old analogy that if you feed your child cake all the time, they won't like broccoli anymore, right? Same story here. If we want them to love the applied mental effort that it takes to study, then we don't want to condition them to that easy environment of media. And it shortens the time they're willing to spend on intellectual problems they're set to solve. Do we want to decrease problem-solving time? No, of course we don't. We already see this. Anyone that's worked with children. How many teachers do we have here, by the way? Wow, several of you. Okay, then you can probably definitely relate to seeing many children these days who don't want to take the time to solve intellectual problems. That's an epidemic now in the educational system. She also mentions that it artificially manipulates the brain into paying attention by violating certain of its natural defenses with frequent visual and auditory changes, known as saliency. Okay, that's a bunch of complicated terminology there. Let's look at a simple example here. She explains and says that sudden close-ups, pans, and zooms are effective in alerting the brain because they violate its reflex need to maintain a predictable personal space. Salient features such as bright colors, quick movements, or sudden noises get attention fast since brains are programmed to be extremely sensitive to such changes that might signal danger. Watch the best documentary you can find, and you're going to still find close-ups, pans, zooms, bright colors, quick movements, sudden noises designed to get your attention fast. About the only media out there that won't do this to you is watching a sermon. Really. This is how media is designed. And in a way, that's okay because it's accomplishing the purpose that it's designed for, to grab your attention. But when we look at it from a brain development standpoint of a child, that's not okay. In a sense, these carefully planned manipulations separate the natural responses of brain and body. Although the viewer's attention is alerted, there is no need for physical action. Let's think of an analogy. Some of you have heard my talks before. You've probably heard this one. Actually, before I get to that, though, let me mention another one. As we saw in this one, they are geared toward grabbing the attention of the brain because brains are programmed to be extremely sensitive to such changes that might signal danger. If you're sitting here watching me, and let's say a mouse got up on this light here and started running across, would you stay watching me? No, you probably wouldn't. Your attention would turn to that. Why? Well, it's a mouse in church. That's not good. But probably what caught your attention was it was moving quickly. It was something different. And that's how this media is playing on your brain, because as it changes scenes back and forth, bright colors, quick movements, sudden noises, it is capitalizing on our God-given, this is a good thing, it is our God-given ability to divert our attention to something that maybe really needs our attention. So to the analogy I was going to use, suppose you're in Africa on a safari and you're enjoying your time outside riding in your safari vehicle, but you decide you're tired of riding, so you're going to get out and walk. So you get out and you're enjoying the stroll and you're watching the elephants over there and the giraffes over there, and the antelope over there, just enjoying your time outside. Well, then a sudden movement grabs your attention. We're programmed for this. That's a good thing. And so you turn your attention, what's that? And you look in the bushes over there, and a lion steps out. It got your attention. And so you're like, wow, that's a lion. Well, then he crouches, and you see that feline tail twitch, and you know he's about ready to go for you. What are you going to do about it? Run. Back to that vehicle, right? Faint. Faint. Yeah, that's good. I had someone at a seminar recently tell me they would take a selfie. This is definitely the media-saturated generation, isn't it? No, if you're a normal human being, you are going to run and hope you can run faster than that lion. That's the natural response of brain and body. Your brain says, hey, that's dangerous. Do something about it, and do it fast. And you obey. You do that fast. That's a natural response of brain and body. Now, suppose the child, he's sitting there watching something on television, and you're getting these quick movements, sudden noises, bright colors and everything. It's telling the brain, hey, that's dangerous. Is the child running away? No, they're just sitting there. They're just absorbing it. And that's where we've disconnected the natural response of brain and body. The viewer's attention, as it says, the viewer's attention is alerted, but there's no need for physical action. And so that's very confusing to the young mind, who's trying to make sense of the world around them, trying to myelinate their brain and grow and develop, and we're bombarding them with this confusion. It induces neural passivity. What is neural passivity? What is neural referring to? Neurons, brain cells, all right. What is passivity? That's what you're doing right now. Not doing anything, right? Just kind of sitting there. Neural passivity. Do we want our children's brains to become neurally passive? That is not a good thing. It reduces the brain's ability to remain actively focused on a task. And her last point, number 8, television has a hypnotic. Now she's talking about television here because this book was written, this comes from her book Endangered Minds. You probably saw some of those on the table back there. This book was written, though, I think around 2000, so this has been a while ago. Television was the big deal then. That was the big study where a lot of the research was done. We now know that, she says television, but this applies to most media types. It has a hypnotic and possibly neurologically addictive, again, it's not possible, we know it's neurologically addictive, effect on the brain. How? By changing the frequency of its electrical impulses in ways that block active mental processing. Do we want to block children's active mental processing? Definitely not. So, electronics might be a good babysitter. I hear this one a lot. Hang on, you just took away my best babysitter. I don't have anything else that's going to keep my child's attention like my iPad. I see it when I travel a lot. On an airplane and a child starts crying, and what's the mom do? Hand them a piece of technology, and 30 seconds later, they're zoned out. It's hypnotic. It's designed to do that. Parents tell me, it's the only thing I have to keep my child's attention. I said, yes, because it's designed to keep their attention. We don't need to ask whether it's keeping their attention. We know it will. We need to ask whether it's good that it's keeping their attention. And I'll get to more of that in a moment. But what about interactive media? Is there a redeeming quality here? Okay, we know we shouldn't sit there and watch TV. I've had a lot of parents tell me, I got rid of the TV. That's a good thing. But it's not just TV. Or maybe you're saying, well, I don't let my kids use the types of media that cause these problems, the passive types of media. No, I only use interactive types of media. Well, a recent article was published titled, Interactive Screen Time is Worse Than TV. Now that title caught my attention. I said, wait a second, interactive screen time worse than TV? What about all the educational media out there? So I started researching it. Now this was written by a researcher. She's a pediatric psychiatrist who has, for years, I think over 30-year career, treated many children who have various problems, be it behavior problems, psychological problems, many learning disabilities, all sorts of problems. And she found, as she explains, as she introduces her article, she found that, in years past when she had a problem child come to her, she says, I quickly learned the first thing I would do is take away television. And she said most of the time, that fixed 99% of the problems I was dealing with. Just take away the television. And the child went back to how they should be acting, how they should be in a normal state. But she says now, as we have more types of technology coming in, she said she's realized that she can't just take television away. And she realized she had to start taking other types of media away. But now, and so this has been a progression. First it was take the media away, television away. Now it's taking all sorts of other types of electronics away. And now she says, in modern times, she's reached a point where she realizes that she can leave the television in, let them watch television, but she has to take away the other types of electronics, and the treatment will still work. Let me allow her to explain a little bit. She says, if even a small amount of interactive screen time, the screen time that's supposed to be good, right? The interactive screen time remained. If even a small amount remained outside of school, the intervention didn't work. Her treatment plan would not work if she left interactive media in it. She's done clinical observations on hundreds of patients, the typical overstimulated, impulsive, hyper-aroused kid on screens, the dramatic changes in mood, focus, and compassion capacity while off of them, even if TV was allowed, and the setbacks that occurred when the handheld devices returned. She found that just 30 minutes of either computer use or gaming caused disturbed sleep and daytime fatigue, compared to 2 hours or more of TV required for similar effects. She's saying the child can sit there and watch television for 2 hours to get the same effect that they get from a half hour of computer use or gaming. Interactive media, many times, is like TV on steroids. It is way more damaging to the mind than the television. In a crossover study comparing a single evening of excessive gaming versus excessive television viewing, the gaming condition resulted in impairment of both sleep. She goes on to list the types of impairment, the altered sleep structure, slow wave sleep, prolonged sleep onset, and impaired cognition in the form of verbal memory testing, while the TV condition caused inefficient sleep but did not change the overall sleep structure, nor did it cause cognitive impairment. So she explains here, the very interactiveness, the part we think is good, is overstimulating to the nervous system, especially a developing one, via sensory and circadian reactions and psychological and psychosocial, psychological and physiological hyperarousal. Once the arousal stress cycle becomes chronic, it will eventually cause damage to the nervous system. And notice what she says next. Mere moderation of screen time is often not sufficient to interrupt this vicious self-perpetuating cycle. Parents say, okay, I'll limit my child's media use. She says that doesn't work. Mere moderation is not going to do it if they're already in that situation of having problems with media use. Now, I know from hearing questions from a lot of people, a question in your mind right now is, okay, she mentioned gaming, what about interactive media in an educational sense where it's not highly stimulating, but they're still interacting with the screen and doing things, that should be helping them learn. You're correct. That's not as damaging to the brain. But it's not necessarily good either. This is an area of research that we don't fully understand. And so, again, we need to be a little bit preventative about this because we rarely find actual benefits to media and to technology for children. Furthermore, though, I would add, as I'll get to in a moment, that they've not found any benefits to educational media. There are much better ways to learn without the supposed benefit of the media, the interactive media. So, yes, there are different types of interactive media. Gaming, violent gaming, is definitely worse than doing a math program on a computer. I understand there's a difference there. But the math program on the computer may not be actually that helpful. Again, I'll get to that in just a moment here. There's an area of the brain, though, that I'd like to focus on for just a minute because it's very important to us as Seventh-day Adventists. The anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex is linked with impulse control, decision-making, emotion, controlling emotional responses, attention, motivation, error detection, and the center of the free will. Is this an important area of the brain? Very, very important, especially that second to last item, error detection. Do we need, as we talked this morning, to be able to detect error? I mean, we are going to be bombarded with error. Deceive, if it were possible, the very elect, the Bible says. We need crystal clear minds that are able to detect error with the Lord's help. Thankfully, we have that help. We need a well-functioning anterior cingulate cortex. But why am I bringing up this random area of the brain? All right, let's get to that. A recent study found media multitasking is increasingly prevalent in modern society and has been associated with decreased cognitive control abilities as well as negative psychosocial impacts such as depression and social anxiety, negative social well-being, and poor academic performance. Media multitasking. What is media multitasking? Well, have you ever watched a video and texted somebody at the same time? Have you ever been studying on a computer and texted somebody at the same time? Media multitasking is pretty much the way we operate when it comes to using media. And again, though, why is this related to the anterior cingulate cortex? Here it is. Higher media multitasking activity is associated with smaller gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex. Wait a second. This important area of the brain, controlling all these critical functions, including error detection, smaller gray matter density in this anterior cingulate cortex with higher media multitasking. Now, just to clarify here, smaller gray matter is not a good thing. In case you were confused. Smaller is worse when it comes to a brain area. We want a well-developed anterior cingulate cortex. We should be doing things to increase the gray matter. Media multitasking. The study revealed a significant relationship between media multitasking and brain structure variations. Individuals who reported higher amounts of media multitasking had smaller gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex. Our main finding indicated that heavier media multitaskers had smaller ACC volumes. Media multitasking decreasing the gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, again, this could be using one form of media, more than one form of media at a time, texting while you're studying, watch a video on the computer while you're doing something on your phone, would be some good examples. But also, it's not specifically named in the research as media multitasking. When I've studied into it and looked at the results, the quickly jumping from one thing to another that is typical in our media use stimulates and sort of does very similar things to the brain as an actual media multitasking environment. Reading something, and then you check your phone, and then you're back to reading, and then you look up something online. The research I found indicates that anytime you are not focused on something for more than about 15 minutes could begin to decrease that anterior cingulate cortex. I'm talking about media use. You know, if you're not focused for 15 minutes. How many of you have done a research project? Say you Google your search term, looking for an article or something, and so there goes one media use, or one task rather, and you click on the first link and you realize, oh, this isn't the one. Back, there's 3 right there. You click on the next one, there's 4. You scan through that, you copy, paste, there's 5. You back to Google, there's 6. Then back again, there's 7. And now you look at the next site, there's 8. In 3 minutes, you may have gone through 8 or 10 different transitions. And so if we're doing research projects on the computer, I've tried to apply this in my own life. It's difficult, though. It is how Google is engineered. A book was written recently called The Shallows. And it was all about how Google and many internet-based companies are engineering their websites and search engines to make you go from one thing to another. They want to create shallow thinking. So we need to be very careful to focus for as long a period as possible when we're involved with media. The pattern of brain structural differences obtained in the present study, this was talking about the media multitasking, was very similar to the neurocorrelates of internet addiction. This is another connection here. It's not just media multitasking. They're saying we've also found that in internet addiction, we see decreased gray and white matter densities in the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex is a crucial nexus of information processing pathways in the brain. It has been implicated in sensory motor, nociceptive, and higher cognitive and emotional motivational processes. The ACC is generally thought to be involved in error or conflict detection. This is a critical area of the brain. We need to be very careful not to damage this. The lower or damaged anterior cingulate cortex is linked with OCD, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, addictions, including drug addictions, poor emotional regulation, poor motivation, neuroticism, sensation seeking, and impulsivity. So I had that duplicated there. See our time running out. Okay, here's another area that is important to just mention for a moment. Overuse of smartphones and game devices hampers the balanced development of the brain. Heavy users are likely to develop the left side of their brains, leaving the right side untapped or underdeveloped. I go into this very in-depth in iChild, but as we look at the importance of the right side of the brain, we know that that's very involved in spiritual strength and spiritual understanding, along with the frontal lobe. Do we want an area of our brains that is responsible for a lot of spiritual strength and understanding to be damaged, to be decreased? Definitely not. And so there's a lot more study needing to be done in this area, but they are finding that it's possible that heavy media use is linked to a decreased volume or an untapped areas in the right side of the brain. But what about educational media? Is there one thing that it's good to use media for? Perhaps educational media can benefit us. A recent article in Kyrene School District, they have decided to be innovative. They've gone all out when it comes to educational media. Since 2005, they've spent nearly $33 million on educational technology. If anyone should be seeing some gains in technology, it should be Kyrene School District with that kind of money spent. So what have they found? Well, in the classroom of the future, stagnant scores. Since 2005, the date they started investing in educational technology, scores in reading and math have stagnated in Kyrene, even as statewide scores have risen. Now, for sure, test scores can go up and down for many reasons. Maybe media isn't the only reason. But to many education experts, something is not adding up when it comes to educational technology. Here and across the country, schools are spending billions of dollars on educational technology, even as they cut their budgets and lay off teachers, with little proof that this approach is improving basic learning. The district superintendent of the Kyrene School District, the one who spent $33 million on educational technology, he was asked, what do you think about the fact that your scores are not rising? Has it been beneficial that you spent all this money? He said, well, my gut is telling me we've had growth, but we have to have some measure that's valid, and we don't have that. My gut is telling me? Is that a reason to spend $33 million? That is not scientifically sound right there. Tom Vander Ark, former executive director for education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is now an investor in educational media and educational technology companies. An investor. If you invest in something and somebody asks you, what do you think about such and such a product, the one that you've just invested in? Are you going to be like, oh, no, that's no good. Don't worry about that. No, you're going to be saying everything you can. You're going to be talking it up. Yeah, this is the best thing you could do. It'll do this. It'll do that. It's as good as it gets. Yeah, you're going to want that product sold because you have a stake in it. You've invested in it. So Tom Vander Ark, the guy who's investing in this, he was asked, well, how's it going with educational technology? Are we seeing some gains from that? He says, quote, the data is pretty weak. It's very difficult when we're pressed to come up with convincing data. The people selling it, the ones saying, research shows this leapfrog will advance your child's IQ by such and such. I'm not sure this is reason enough to spend $33 million either. Steve Jobs was once asked what his kids thought about the new iPad, the one that's supposed to help learning so much. He said they haven't used it. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. Chris Anderson, CEO of 3D Robotics, says, my kids accuse me and my wife of being fascists and overly concerned about tech. And they say none of their friends have the same rules. Well, that's because we've seen the dangers of technology firsthand. I've seen it in myself, and I don't want to see that happen to my kids. Across the Silicon Valley, some of the biggest names in the tech industry are sending their children to schools that are tech-free. And they're limiting or eliminating it in their homes. Alan Eagle holds a computer science degree from Dartmouth and works in executive communications at Google. He says his daughter, a 5th grader, doesn't know how to use Google. This guy works for Google. His daughter doesn't know how to use Google. And people ask him, well, how is she ever going to learn? He says it's super easy. It's like learning to use toothpaste. At Google and all these places, we make technology as brain-dead easy to use as possible. There's no reason why kids can't figure it out when they get older. These are the people designing it. He said, we make it brain-dead. We make it so easy, there's no worries about them learning it at a later age. And Paul Thomas, executive professor of education at Furman University, says technology is a distraction when we need literacy, numeracy, and what kind of thinking? Critical thinking. Technology is a distraction from critical thinking. It just isn't necessary and can actually be harmful at times. But what about the fact that it keeps kids' attention? Isn't that beneficial? Well, it does keep their attention. A little well, actually, and that's precisely the problem. Because electronics are stimulating, video games and other interactive screen media are being marketed as learning tools. But studies show these interactive screen media types have an adverse effect on attention and impulsivity over time, especially in children who already have attention problems. Notice, in children that already have attention problems, we're marketing these things to them to help them pay attention. I mean, that is the go-to resource now. When you have a child with an attention deficit disorder, they are often, not always, I'm generalizing here, but often they are given an electronics or online-based learning environment because it helps them pay attention longer. And we say, look, the child can't pay attention here, but given the iPad learning environment, look at him, he's paying perfectly good attention. Why is he paying such good attention? Because it's designed to capture his attention, to hold his attention. And so what happens is, I'm going to read a quote here from a study, it's in my notes. Essentially, when it comes to using electronics as a means to engage or reward, it works until it doesn't. More and more stimulation is required for focus, identical to mechanisms in drug addiction. When children report non-screen activities as boring, this should become a red flag to parents and educators. The child has become accustomed to an unnatural level of stimulation. So what's happening as we accustom these children to this level of stimulation, this interactive learning environment, now we should have interactive learning environments, this media interactive learning environment, pretty soon real life gets boring. And so we actually accentuate the attention deficit problem. We're making it worse over time. A couple more quick points before we close. When it comes to learning, obviously a major factor is remembering what has been learned, right? That is certainly an important part of education. And as it turns out, tech use is certainly not helping that at all. A term was coined recently called digital dementia. Now, South Korea uses more technology than any other country in the world. 88% of people own a smartphone, compared with 72% in the US, in case you're wondering. And they've been using it for a long time. Doctors have recently started noticing problems, however, leading them to coin a phrase, early onset digital dementia. Now, if somebody talks about someone that has dementia, how old do you think they are? Well, they're getting up there, right? We don't need to name ages, but they're getting older. But early onset digital dementia, what age are we talking about here? We're talking about like 15, very young. A deterioration of cognitive abilities, much like dementia we typically see with old age, or even with a head injury. They estimate that nearly 15% of the population is suffering from this illness. We are so inundated by information that our attention span has become very small. We're heading toward a global attention deficit syndrome. We cannot be inactive anymore, yet we are losing the power to concentrate. I'm going to read another quote here from a study. As a man explained this very well, he says, if we're not drowned by email, by text messages, or tweets telling us to look at some site or YouTube clip, or browsing our friends' updates on a social network, listening to MP3 music, zapping through 100 TV shows, answering the phone, or calling someone, we somehow must find another way to occupy ourselves. Many people waste so much time keeping their friends in the network happy that they have little time left for productive work. They have externalized much of their knowledge into the cloud and in their smartphones. They do not need to remember many facts, threatening the functioning of their memory. Students do not write essays these days, rather using Google search, copy, and paste. They glue pieces of information together, hardly understanding what they are producing. They are no longer able to read complicated text, spoiled by bite-sized pieces of information contained in tweets. Why should I do complicated calculations when my smartphone has a built-in calculator? Why worry about counting change? I pay by credit card. Why bother about spelling mistakes when my spell checker makes fewer mistakes than my teachers did? Why remember phone numbers when my smartphone has speech activation? I do not worry if I cannot find my phone at home. I use my wife's phone, and the ringing of my phone makes sure I can locate it. Too bad my tennis shoes don't have a ring on them yet, but soon we'll figure that out. Handwriting, whatever. I dictate most things these days, or else use a keyboard. With a language app on my phone, I can converse on a simple level in any language in the world. I forgot where I found the app, but I'm sure you'll be able to locate it. Even before I used the English-Japanese language app, it was easier for me to order in a Japanese restaurant. They have plastic replicas of the meals in the window, so I just took a picture with my digital camera and showed it to the waiter. I find it convenient when hiking that I no longer have to memorize details of a map. What does it matter that my sense of orientation may have deteriorated? We don't need all this anyway. It's all in the cloud. It's all in our smartphones. I'm not saying that voice activation is a bad thing on our phones, but can you see where they're going with this? Can you see where we're getting this digital dementia? Why do I need to remember something? It's all right here. And so we're not even activating. We're not even using our memories. And pretty soon we start getting the digital dementia syndrome. And there was, again, I'm skipping over an enormous amount of material here. They've done a lot more study into why this digital dementia thing. It's not just that the phones store the information for us. There's many other factors. Watch iChild for that. The more technology that was used to teach a particular course, we're still in this thread of educational technology, the fewer the students who felt they were able to get something out of that course. We saw that quote already. Sorry, the slide's a bit out of order there. So now for just a couple of points pulled from the last session on iChild about unreality and how really, in my mind, what got me interested in this topic to begin with was just the fact that this is just not a real world environment for children. And I said, how is this affecting them? Because I knew from a brain science perspective that they needed this real world environment for proper brain development. And they're not getting it. So what's going on here? Don't they need this? How is this affecting them? And so they find that children who pretend and imagine things have better social competence, better language development, higher IQ, better problem solving. They were more patient, more perseverant. They had better connection making. Do we want children to have these areas of their brain developed? Of course we do. And so there's no need, though, to pretend and imagine things when it's already been pretended, it's already been imagined for you. You know what I mean by that? It's pre-baked creativity. They don't have to creatively imagine things. It's already been created for them. So how do children learn without the benefit of technology? Well, I mentioned a type of school system that is popular in the Silicon Valley, known as Waldorf schools. Waldorf schools have a no-tech policy until the 8th grade. They focus on hands-on learning. There are several of these schools in the Silicon Valley area, which is a big reason for that is the tech CEOs are sending their children there. They focus on hands-on learning. They do things like knitting, patterning, math skills that are mental and actual physical objects that they're using, coordination, hand-eye coordination. They'll do things like food fractions in the kitchen, and just many. Really, when I looked at the Waldorf school program and curriculum, I said, wow, that's a great homeschool. That's how we should be doing it. They have some ideas and tenets that I don't agree with. I'm not here endorsing Waldorf schools. But the principles of hands-on learning and eliminating technology are quite impressive. And so how are Waldorf schools doing? Well, it's hard to tell because they don't use standardized tests either. But if it's any indication, I think it's 94% of their graduates go on to some of the top universities in the nation and end up being very successful later in life. So that should definitely indicate something to us. As one teacher in a Waldorf school said, for 3 weeks we ate our way through fractions. When I made enough fractional pieces of cake to feed everyone, do you think I got their attention? How did the students respond? Well, they interviewed some of the students. And one of them, age 11, said he recently went to visit cousins and found himself sitting around with 5 of them playing on their gadgets, not paying any attention to him. So he waved to them. He said, hey, I'm here. He didn't have his gadget to play on. And he said he felt quite out of place and quite disappointed that he couldn't just talk to somebody. They had to all be on their phones. He was happy with a non-technology environment. Finn, age 10, whose father works at Google, says he likes learning with pen and paper because you can look back and see how sloppy your handwriting was in first grade. You can't do that with computers because all the letters are the same. Besides, if you learn to write on paper, you can still write if water spills on the computer or if power goes out. Now that's a thinking kid right there. There's a lot more we could consider, of course, but we have reached our closing time. It's one that is, again, thoroughly fleshed out in iChild. A lot more material here laid out in a hopefully more understandable and coherent level because I have the time to explain it more there. But let's close with one more quotation here. We saw it this morning. And really, I think if we followed this, we don't even need the DVD iChild. The more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement, and the more in harmony with nature, the more favorable it is to physical and mental vigor and to spiritual strength. If we would just follow this, we don't need the research that says that these new gadgets are bad for our children. We know it because it says right here, more free from artificial excitement, more in harmony with nature, building physical, mental vigor, and spiritual strength. I think the whole technology discussion really should be injected with some common sense. You know, we're really inundated with it that we think it's crazy to cut back on media or to eliminate it from our children's lives. But I would submit to you that perhaps we're actually crazy to blindly move forward and assume that it's all good for us. Really, the previous generation, back to the beginning of time, didn't have all these supposed benefits. They would actually have a right to call us crazy for just being like, oh yeah, the new technology, let's go for it. Must be good. The company selling it says it is. This is new material that's potentially dangerous. We would do well to use caution. And it's often said that technology is the way of the future. Maybe it is, but how do we know? How do we know that in 10 years we won't look back and say, we were so foolish? How do we know? We don't know. And so again, I think we just need to be preventative and take on faith what we are told. How much research do we have to have? We don't. We know this is true. Let's become God's peculiar people and not just follow the ways of the world. I'm not saying we can't benefit. Before I close, let me just clarify here, because somebody's going to come up to me and say, really, the washer was new technology, the washing machine. I realize that technology can have a broad definition, and I hope you understand that as I've mentioned technology, I'm talking about screen-based technology. And I'm not talking about new inventions, washing machines, and cars, and things that make our life easier. I'm talking about the screen-based technology that is definitely damaging to our child. And there are, again, many points that I have not had time to mention. I encourage you to grab iChild and hear a better explanation there. So with that, maybe I'll take a couple of questions. Is there anything I didn't explain well? I know this was a bit of a disjointed session because I was trying to grab as much information as I could. Was there anything you felt I didn't explain well and you just needed a bit of clarification on that you would like to ask a question on? Anyone? Yes, go ahead. Yeah. There is. There is. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that. Research shows they'll have groups of people that they've studied, and they'll have one group read something off of standard book, pages, tactile, and another group of people read something off of a reading device. So not a web page with all the distractions on it, but an actual reading device that supposedly mimics the real page. And they don't know why, but the people who read it off of an actual physical book have better reading comprehension and far greater retention. They remembered much better when they read it off of the actual physical page. More than that, some of the readers have technology in them to help alleviate this, but it's still there to a limited degree, and it's definitely there on any computer screen, is the color of the light. It's typically referred to as blue light You'll see this. You get on your smartphone, you get a blue light filter. That doesn't take it away totally. It helps. But the color of the light emanating, the way we see the screen is the light, and the different colors of light, the screen is light. And the color of light that comes off of that is what's known as blue light. The technical term is more related to being a high energy light. So if you look at light on a spectrum, we have red over here, that's low energy light. We move over to the other side, we get blue right before we get to ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light, you go outside, you get a sunburn. You just experience the effects of ultraviolet light. Blue light is not quite ultraviolet light, but it's high energy. And so what they find is as we are looking at the screen, our eyes, let me back up before I say we're looking at the screen. Our eyes have filters on them that take out, I believe it's about 98, 99% of ultraviolet light. Sunglasses aren't completely necessary. We've been living without sunglasses for quite a while. This is a relatively new thing. Sure, I'm not saying they're bad for your eyes to wear sunglasses. It can be good. But our eyes have filters that cut out most of the harmful ultraviolet light that we experience outside. The screen, however, is just under that threshold that the filter will cut out. And so the high energy light that is emanating from our screens bypasses the eye's natural filters and goes right to the back of the eye, to the retina, and begins to cause damage to the retina that is typically linked to macular degeneration and other eye disorders. I was going somewhere with this. Reading on a screen, I guess, is I'll close it with that. Reading on a screen, you're not getting that color light from the book, from the page, but you definitely are from the screen, even with some reading filters that you can get. So we need to be careful about screen reading. So that was the long answer to your question, yeah. Anyone else? Nobody? All right, we're all tired. Oh, yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes. What about them? How about that? With music? Yeah. It is the nature of how I've been involved with filmmaking. It's how we do it to keep your attention, You plant a camera, stationary camera, on the violinist, you're going to lose attention pretty quickly. But if we have 3 cameras changing angles all the time, it's going to hold your attention. And so while it's not necessarily bad that you have this material that's interesting and has a good content in it, it's also not necessarily good. But really what I've chosen to focus on here is that it's definitely not good for the young child. So for us as adults, we can make that decision, maybe don't do as much as we would like, maybe limit that. But for the young child, up until about age 12, those fast scene changes can definitely be damaging to the brain. So that's probably the best I can do in a synopsis. Okay, I think, did you have your hand up? Okay. Okay, I think we are all tired, so let's take a break, a 11-hour and 30-minute break. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for the research that you've given us and that we've been able to see that merely sheds light on the beautiful plan that you've given us and the counsel you've given us to have that quiet and simple lifestyle for our children. We thank you for the time we've spent together. We ask your blessing now on our night of rest. May you wake us refreshed in the morning to spend time with you and to gather together here again. And we thank you and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.